Colleagues, this is the meeting of the subcommittee to prepare for the operation of the Select Committee on the petition presented at the Council meeting of the 8th of May 2013. Oh, a very long title. We've already formed a quorum and it's time for us to start. In accordance with Appendix 4 of the House Rules, we now proceed to the procedures for election of chairman and deputy chairman. We need verbal nominations and seconders. Nominations, Mr. Kwok-him. Any seconder? All right. Mr. Chan Hak-kan. Mr. Kwok-him, will you accept the nomination? Yes. Good. All right. Any more nominations? Oh, sorry. I saw Mr. Tony there. Yes, he did raise his hand. Coincidentally, I saw him raise his hand. Mr. Kwok-him has accepted the nomination. That's seconded by Mr. Tony there, so that's a valid nomination. Any other nominations? If not, I declare Mr. Kwok-him elected chairman of the subcommittee. Thank you, members. Do we need to elect a deputy chairman? Yes? All right, any nominations? Mr. Kenneth Lam, Ms. Sito, any seconder? Mr. Dennis Kwok seconds. Mr. Sito, do you accept the nomination? Yes. Any other nominations? If there's no more nomination, I declare Ms. Sito elected deputy chairman of the subcommittee to prepare for the operation of the Select Committee on the petition presented at the Council meeting of the 8th of May 2013. Ms. Sito. I hope that we only need one meeting to handle all the matters. I received from Mr. Chan Hak-kan a written application to apply for late membership of the subcommittee. His letter has been tabled. Members, would you agree to accept Mr. Chan Hak-kan's application in this regard? Mr. James Toh, Mr. Chairman, I have this thought. I don't know whether this is relevant. We now have 13 members as an odd number. Well, we can have 11 to 15 members. We don't need to keep an odd number, but very often in the past is an odd number. In the House Committee, there was this piece of opinion that for the subcommittee to operate smoothly, it can become the future Select Committee. We now have 13 members. For preparation, I guess 14 should present no problem. But in future, we may have a transitional problem. Or we can say that in future, he does not need to join the Select Committee. And there was this practice to keep a certain ratio between the pan-democrats and the pro-establishment camp. I have to say that there's no restriction on the quorum or the number of members for a subcommittee. For the select committees, we need to propose the number of members to the House Committee for a final decision for a select committee, but this is only for preparation. So for a select committee, we may need to decide on the number of members, be it 7, 11, 13, 15, or whatnot, at the House Committee. But this is a subcommittee to do preparation only, and with no restriction on the number of applicants. Any member who has any views on this issue can join and discuss together. I've not recalled that for any subcommittee in the past there's any restriction on the number of members. Members may be interested in joining the preparation subcommittee, and later some of them may also be interested in joining the select committee. So I just want to state what I understand. Mr. James Toh. So, Mr. Chairman, you're stating what you understand for a subcommittee, for preparation, and a select committee. I just want to know whether members would like to keep an even number for the future select committee, or they may want to keep a certain ratio. I don't think the number 13 and the so-called racial issue would be subject to controversy. We did have some sort of tacit agreement in the past. I don't know what's in the mind of the pro-establishment camp. They don't need to disclose that, but I would like to know whether they would like to overturn what happened in the past. Mr. Chan Hak-kan. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry that because of technical reasons I submitted this application late. Mr. Chairman, in actual fact, very early I expressed my interest in the work of the subcommittee. In recent times, my ward office has got 2 more staff members, and there was some rationalization of facilities, etc., etc. My staff did fax the application to the Legislative Secretariat, which did not receive it. So I'm now submitting another application in the hope that I can be allowed to join at this juncture. There's no political consideration as suggested by Mr. James Toh. So it's for members' consideration. Any more comments? Mr. James Toh. Mr. Chairman, this is an application for joining the subcommittee. That's a fact. Mr. Chan Hak-kan said that very early he expressed his interest to join. Did he raise his hand in the House Committee, or did he just tell himself that he would like to join? Did he tell his party members, or did he tell the media? Mr. Chan Hak-kan. Mr. Chairman, I told you that I would like to join, and in newspaper reports I saw my name in the list of members interested in joining the subcommittee. On the 1st of June, you did not submit the application before midnight to the Secretariat. I think that's a fact, so let's not argue about that. Now that this subcommittee has been established, we have to handle Mr. Chan Hak-kan's application. So I'd like to see whether members would accept the application. That's the reality. As for the number of members, we need to discuss that under another agenda item. Mr. James Toh. Mr. Chairman, briefly, let me say this. Perhaps Mr. Chan Hak-kan was late because of those circumstances. Now we have 13 members, and we have certain internal logic to follow. So I have to expressly say that I oppose the joining of Mr. Chan Hak-kan. This is the first time I'm doing this. Any objection? If there's objection, we'll have to take a vote. Mr. To? Well, in fact, this list of membership is just like proportional representation. This application is rather unforeseeable. But of course, the ratio is also unforeseeable. I hope that in future we can follow up on the ratio of representation. After all, this is a subcommittee for preparation. When we proceed to the next phase, we should further consider the issue. I have no comment on Mr. Chan Hak-kan's application to join. All right, if there's no further comment, we'll take a vote. Those in favor of accepting Mr. Chan Hak-kan's application, please raise their hands. Is that clear? Including Chung Kwok-pan, Dr. Priscilla Leung, Mr. Wong Kwok-kin, Mr. To, and Mr. Kenneth Leung, and also Mr. Tony Dare. Those against, please raise their hands. Mr. James To, any abstention? All right, that's clear. Mr. Dennis Kwok abstains. Let's proceed to item 3 on our agenda, terms of reference of the Select Committee. Here I'd like to thank the Secretariat for preparing a paper for us. That is CB bracket 4730/2012-13 bracket 01. In paragraph 5 of that paper, we have the proposed terms of reference. Any comments? Mr. Dennis Kwok? Mr. Chairman? Of course, Mr. To and I did participate in the handling of the petition. At that time, we did give detailed consideration to the petition. In the Finance Committee, when the ICAC answered our questions, there were certain information under doubt about its accuracy and truth. That's why we would like to have a select committee. In the paper, a brief explanation is proposed. However, nothing is mentioned about the accuracy of the information submitted. I believe the proposed terms of reference here is too narrow. Well, in line with the functions of select committees, in fact, I did referred to past cases. So I have actually prepared a paper. Mr. Chairman, would you like to consider my paper as well? Well, please pass the paper to the Secretariat staff. Besides, I've also prepared a suggestion. Perhaps I should pass this to members for reference also. In fact, the terms of reference of this subcommittee has to be based on the content of the petition. Of course, Mr. Dennis Kwok and Mr. To have submitted their proposals. So all these are for members' reference. We'll consider how the subcommittee is to start our work on the petition. Mr. James Toh, Mr. Chairman, I would like to propose a simple approach. Sorry, I've not yet read the latest submissions. Can we add in an expression to the effect of related matters? Mr. Chairman, just now I had a few words with the clerk. Handling of gifts. I'm looking at the Chinese version. That gives us the impression of the handling of the gifts after receiving the gifts. Normally, we won't say in Chinese, 處理禮物. Usually, it will be the giving and handling of gifts. Perhaps that would make the terms of reference more comprehensive. So perhaps the Secretariat and members can explain to us whether the word handling will cover the meaning give.
Chairman, I think the proposed terms of reference by the Secretariat is rather narrow. Mr. Timothy Tong gave evidence in the committee under oath. We do not know whether his evidence or what he said was true. If not, it's not, then that he may be liable to criminal. He may be liable to legal consequences. I think we have to broaden the scope suggested by the Secretariat so that the Select Committee can make further inquiry into the matters. The matters were asked at the PAC. We should include his inappropriate acts during his tenure and whether he contacted any inappropriate persons here. Mr. Tony Share. Chairman, you said the terms of reference should be based on the petition. In the Chinese version of the petition, the last paragraph, to fully follow up the duty visits and the official entertainment and handling of gifts by Timothy Tong. Is it the scope? Maybe Ms. Ho and Mr. Kwok can elaborate on that. Mr. Dennis Kwok and Ms. Sid Ho's proposed terms of reference have been submitted. I'll ask them to explain their proposed terms of reference first, and then I will explain my own suggestions. Paper has been tabled. Ms. Sid Ho or Mr. Kwok, who will take us through the proposed terms of reference. I follow the way that terms of reference was drafted in past subcommittee, and I think, Chairman, your proposal is even leaner. But I would like to hear Ms. Ho's views first. I'm reading the proposals, the two proposals. Chairman, in your suggestions, there's no mentioning of local and overseas visits. That is, you omitted local and overseas. I think it's all right for us to leave out these two words. Sorry, I'm comparing the two. I agree we should put down and relevant matters. We are concerned whether putting down relevant matters, related matters, will broaden the scope unnecessarily. But I'm sure even legal professionals agree that the related matters refer to those related to matters mentioned earlier on. So it refers to the matters related to the four matters mentioned earlier instead of the others. In the course of investigation, if we dig up any previously unknown matters related to, say, for example, entertainment and gifts, we can always decide whether these unknown matters should be put down, should be investigated as well. Chairman's proposal. You also put down the information submitted by the ICAC. Is it comprehensive and true? I have some doubts here. How come they would be able to submit some information that is not true? This is my concern. I think we should follow up on this point too. We should not just accept that the gifts list is comprehensive. We should also look at who counter-checked the list. And this counter-checking officer's list should also be submitted to LegCo. Mr. James Toh. Chairman, I've read the two proposals. I don't want to go to them points by points. Now, the Secretariat, the proposal is very succinct. Now, coming back to handling of gifts, if this phrase covers giving and receiving, I will take that point, and I think we can also add and related matters, and the whole thing is completed. As for investigating into whether he was being lavish, is about the perspective you take, so we don't have to put that down here. And after investigation, we can always make recommendations and comments. So I don't think we need these points as mentioned in Mr. Kwok's proposal. In the past, when we held subcommittees, terms of reference also cover the words and related matters. And in the past, the select committees were dominated by pro-establishment camps. I'm sure this is going to happen with this select committee as well. And if we do not cover certain points, then some points may be missed out, and it's impossible for us to establish another subcommittee to just deal with that point. I was reading the proposal by Mr. Kwok and Ms. Ho. If the word investigation is used, and Mr. Ip, Chairman, your proposal uses the words look into or study. I hope we are not here to study the matter alone. Adding the words and related matters as proposed from Ms. Ho and Mr. Kwok, I think is fine. Sometimes, maybe Mr. Tong went overseas and received some entertainment. These are related matters. And if we put down and related matters, I don't think we broaden the scope unnecessarily. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Want to comment on Mr. Kwok's proposal. Paragraph 2. Whether the ICAC submits any inaccurate, incomprehensive information and misleads the LegCo. I don't think it suits the terms of reference because they have already got this presupposition. In legal proceedings, the person being investigated is entitled to the benefit of the doubt. So I don't agree with the wording used here. However, towards the end, make recommendations, I think I accept it because we are likely to spend some time on these matters, on matters like the existing mechanism. So after the investigation, we may like to make recommendations. So I agree with the wording used here. Mr. Chairman, your proposal, I want to know whether you are talking about Finance Committee or other committees. I just want to clarify that. Committee mentioned in the petition. Just want to clarify our target. I sat in several of such committees. Accurate, true, full and true information, I don't think they are appropriate. Even after a full investigation on the systems of ICAC, you may not be happy with everything. So putting down full, as in full information, is not right. So we should set down what the charge should be. I strongly oppose to the word true. Even when we investigated more serious matters, we did not mention the word full, the word true information. Mr. Chair. Mr. Kwok said Mr. Timothy Tong chose to give evidence under oath. He did not choose so. He was compelled to do so. For the two proposals, having read them, I agree the one proposed by the Secretariat is more succinct. Now, the focus of investigation is Mr. Tong. But it seems to me in Mr. Kwok's proposal, the investigated body is also the ICAC. So should we investigate whether the ICAC submits true and full information? This is the first thing we have to decide on.
As for related matters, whatever equation or formula you use, I'm worried that this will be an extra no. If you raise the issue A, then all matters related to A will be implied. So if you add all related matters to A, then even for other issues, for issues other than A, you may need to add all related matters as well. As for Dr. Priscilla Leung's remarks, even if the ICAC is to be looked into, the expression of accurate and true may digress from the focus of the subcommittee. So I'm thinking of the smooth operation of the subcommittee. In fact, this select committee must be based on the petition presented. So we really have to look into the content of the petitions. This is to be fair to Mr. Timothy Tong and the ICAC. I'm just reminding Mr. Paul there why we should refer to the ICAC as well. That is, we're not just dealing with Mr. Timothy Tong. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Mr. Chairman, a few points here. First of all, whether or not the acts comply with the terms of reference of the ICAC is important, because that's actually the focus of this task. And then, Mr. Chairman, I can see from your suggestion that that element is also included. Well, whether they're misleading the electoral, whether or not untrue and inaccurate information or responses have been submitted, I agree that it is appropriate to follow the petitions. Concerning the difference between investigation and examination, I believe both should be included. As for the target of our work, is it the ICAC or the Mr. Timothy Tong? I think right from the very beginning, it's the ICAC, and later a former ICAC commissioner is involved. Given these considerations, I would like to see members can accept an amalgamation of the two proposals here, where I can accept proposed additions or deletions. Mr. Ho, Mr. Chairman, well, there are 5 differences between these two versions: examination and investigation, and of course I would opt for investigation. In fact, the Select Committee is for investigation. In Mr. Dennis Kwok's version, we should look into entertainment, gifts, etc., whether or not they comply with the status and terms of reference of the Commissioner and the ICAC. I think we should include those elements. And then impact on the ICAC. As Mr. James Toes said, this is just like a yardstick. If what they did not affect the image of the ICAC, then there's no point for us to investigate. So that's the starting point, is that we have the feeling that they did something that's worthy of investigation. It's just like what the PAC was looking at. So it's appropriate to keep the expression, objectives, and purpose in terms of reference. And then there is this expression of misleading the electoral. The incumbent commissioner admitted that the list first submitted was not comprehensive, although he said that that's not done deliberately. Therefore, I suggest that we keep the mechanism of collection and submission of information to the LegCo in relation to the ICAC. Then we can do away with the query of loading the terms of reference with certain premises. As for the fourth and fifth differences, I can actually accept Mr. Dennis Kwok's version. I wonder whether members would raise a sixth or a seventh difference. Mr. Chan Hak-kan, I've read all the three versions. They're from you, Chairman, Mr. Dennis Kwok, and the Secretariat. In fact, there are not that many differences among them. I'd like to opt for the Secretariat version, but the Secretariat version has not touched upon the truthfulness and accuracy of the information submitted, as well as whether or not the information submitted is comprehensive enough or not. The Secretariat version only deals with handling of gifts. Mr. Dennis Kwok mentioned policies and arrangements, which are appropriate factors to be considered. So on top of the Secretariat's version, I suggest we add in whether or not the information submitted was accurate and true, and we should also add in policies and arrangements. Mr. Chairman, first of all, I agree with Ms. Sit Ho that the wording "yin gao" examination, as suggested by you, Mr. Chairman, is not that appropriate. It should be investigation. As for the scope of the petition, it's suggested that we should base our terms of reference on the content of the petition. So I'd like to clarify whether or not the scope of our terms of reference should be based on the content of the petition. The President agreed to hand over the petition to the House Committee for consideration, and the House Committee decided to set up a select committee. The petition can serve as a reference, but it is not a norm. I don't know whether this understanding is correct or not. Besides, I agree with Mr. Paul there in relation to the expression "related matters." Now, that expression gives me the impression that it is a very broad expression. Everything can be included, all right? Entertainment, activities, accepting gifts, etc. were mentioned. If you add in the expression related matters, the scope would be much broadened. Is it appropriate to have a more stringent and clearer terms of reference? Because if you add in related matters, let me cite an example. If you have a meal, who participate, what remarks are made, etc., etc., you may consider those related matters. I think the scope is just too broad if we add in that expression. So, Mr. Chairman, can you answer my question about petition? Well, my understanding is that the Select Committee was established on the basis of the content of the petition. So we're now discussing the terms of reference. Anything exceeding the content of the petition may not satisfy the terms of reference of the Select Committee. Legal advisor, any advice? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you. The Select Committee was set up on the basis of Article 26 in relation to the petition submitted. The decision was to set up a Select Committee to study the content of the petition. And no less than 22 members have supported that decision. So, in accordance with the rules of procedure, the issue has already been validly passed to the Select Committee. So if we are to exceed the content of the petition, I'm worried about ultra vires and other issues may result or emerge. Any more comments? Mrs. Ma? Mr. Chairman, perhaps I can supplement. In the past, for Select Committees, the arrangement was a bit different. In the past, if a Select Committee was to be established, a preparatory subcommittee would be established under the House Committee. Usually, that was done by way of a resolution. All TOR will be included in the resolution, which was endorsed at the plenary meeting. It is the first time that we invoke 26 of the ROP because of the receipt of this petition. And 22 members were in support of a Select Committee. So the petition should form the scope of the terms of reference of the Select Committee. Mr. Chung Kwok-pan. Mr. Chairman, if your analysis is correct, then the Secretariat's version will not be sufficient because it only mentions to inquire into blah, 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 Mr. Timothy Tong. Ms. Sito and Mr. Dennis Kwok would like to follow up on many other elements, including misleading the LegCo, accuracy and truthfulness of the information provided, etc., etc. So, Mr. Dennis Kwok is suggesting that the Select Committee should also look into the accuracy and truthfulness of the information provided to the LegCo. etc., etc. But the secretary. So Mr. Dennis Kwok's version seems to be suggesting that there's a possibility that the information submitted was inaccurate or untrue. I mean, information submitted by the ICAC. That means the ICAC might be hiding something from us. Then we can put everything under related matters. It seems that members do not trust all information provided by the ICAC. Mr. Leung Kwok-him? Mr. Chairman, it's just simple logic that related matters should be included. You don't need to worry. The person to be inquired into will say that it's not a related matter. Then he just does not answer you, and then he stands there. We can't beat him up or drive him up. He can go to the toilet, he can have a cup of tea. So I think that is excessive worry. The person can say that he doesn't want to answer our questions. For the ICAC, he can just tell us, they can just tell us that they don't have the information. They just want to bet. It's just like what Mr. Barry Chung did.
So we just have limited power. We should not overestimate the power we have. It's like the inquiry into President Clinton. He was asked what he was doing in his office, and he said he was doing nothing. So the person being inquired into can say no to our questions, and we, as a result, should not worry too much. We are accountable to members of the public. If we do not do a good job in the inquiry, we will be criticized. The head of a department has done this messy job, and nobody reported that. It's only when the matter was discovered by the Audit Commission that everything comes to light. Now, if someone chooses to give a piecemeal truth, then some people are bound to help him to do that. That's why we should ask related matters. If we ask things that are not related, the people involved in the matter and the media would stop us. The prosecutor, Mr. Starr, who made inquiry into President Clinton, was also prosecuted him later. So we should be reasonable. That's why we are here. If we restrict ourselves too much, then it might just as well that we don't hold any inquiry. That's why I think the TOR should not cover less than the matters in the petition. In the filibuster, the president would query whether we were asking relevant questions. Mr. Porsche, Mr. Kwok-him were also slammed, not just us. I know you had experience in that regard. With limited powers, there's only so much we can do, and we have to be self-disciplined, and the media will monitor us. Say, for example, we may ask questions about which officials he dined with. We can choose whether to follow up and pursue along that line. We have to be professional, and I think we will be monitored too. Ms. Priscilla Leung and Mr. Lo Kwok. Mr. Lo, over to you first. the chairman, the secretariat, and the legal advisor all gave your explanations that the terms of reference should reflect contents of the petition. Mr. Ip, Chairman, you put forward the word study or examine, and another proposal talks about investigation. The two words cover contents of the petition already. In para 2, there are two areas for us to follow up. First, the duty trips, handling of gifts during Mr. Tong's tenure. Secondly, information submitted by the ICAC, whether is true and comprehensive. If we do not put loaded terms there, we can put down to see whether the information is true and comprehensive. So these are the two areas to inquire into in para 2. And the Independent Review Committee set up by the CE can't fully follow up on matters of Mr. Tong's overseas visit, entertainment, and giving of gifts, as mentioned in the petition. I don't think the rationale behind the petition should be in the terms of reference, because that will be self-explanatory in the inquiry process. As to whether we should use whether the ICAC submits full and true information, I think we can discuss it in the second round. Now, let me explain a bit on my version of TOR. First of all, I agree with Mr. Leung that we should not worry too much. I'm sure we are not worrywarts, and I'm sure we are not cowards, because otherwise we will not be sitting here, we will not be acting as LegCo members. Still, we should have some sort of boundaries. We should set down the line as to what we mean, what should be covered in the TOR. What we discuss here is meaningful. Our consensus here is that the petition should form the basis here. Mr. Dennis Kwok and Ms. Sid Ho had talked with me earlier on, and Mr. Kwok submits his version of TOR. Investigate or study, I don't think they are too different. Before C.Y. Leung became the chief executive, when we inquire into him, we used the word study or inquire. And that's why I make this proposal. But I'm fine with either study or investigate. Concerning whether his acts damage the image of ICAC and whether untrue and incomprehensive information was submitted, I don't think we should include descriptions in the terms of reference. Otherwise, we are putting something leading in the TOR, and we are doing an inquiry here and we should be neutral. That's why I don't think we should include such descriptions here in the TOR. For the point on related matters, Ms. Sitho and other members raised this point, but as said by other members, if we include this, the scope would be much broadened. We are supposed to look at a matter that has happened. And a petition has been submitted to do just that. But if we add the words and related matters, the scope would be much broadened. However, I think we should put down accepting and giving gifts. We should also see whether gifts were given and accepted. After these are added, I think the terms of reference necessarily covers points we are to look at. As for whether we should inquire into the mechanism of the ICAC, and well, it is true that they haven't submitted for information. Maybe it has something to do with the flaws of the mechanism. All right. As for the word recommendation, even if we don't put down the word recommendations, the select committees are bound to make recommendations at the end of the inquiry. Second round, Ms. Priscilla Leung, Portia, Mr. Leung Kwok-him, anyone else? Ms. Leung. Chairman, want to comment on the contents of petition and the TOR of the select committee. As I understand, the petition should be endorsed by at least 20 members. And after that, the petition is handed over to a subcommittee and of the LegCo. LegCo is a body facing the public. And our task here is to make sure the TOR are in line with the select committee. In the petition, it covers a lot. And after the whole inquiry, we may have disagreement. That's why I don't think the TOR should be that broad. We should give room for ourselves to maneuver on points we agree on. As for scope of investigation, first point I think is about the integrity of Timothy Tong, whether the acts of entertainment, duty visits reflect his integrity. Second point, system of ICAC. I don't think we should investigate on the system.
問好多資料。
When it comes to the system of the ICAC, I think we can only examine. We cannot make our terms of reference unlimitedly broad, otherwise we lose our credibility amongst members of the public. So you have to be reasonable. So for the system of the ICAC, we can only examine it. We cannot investigate into the ICAC. Mr. Porde, Mr. Chairman, I believe different members will have different opinion about the expressions to be used. Can we stop for a while here such that the members concerned can work out amendments, if possible? Well, Mr. Chairman, you're more experienced than I in handling such matters, but I'd like to clarify something about the petition. As the Secretariat told us, this situation is unprecedented. We went through a vote before establishing the Select Committee, and this Select Committee is based on the petition. I have reservation over the suggestion that we should be led by the petition. As many members said, there's a background to the petition. A lot of explanation had been offered. It's not like a pleading in a court proceedings. So that cannot serve as a terms of reference. Theoretically, we can investigate into whether or not in the past 39 years the ICAC had done enough in anti-corruption efforts, whether or not Hong Kong is a clean city, etc., etc. And for comprehensive follow-up, should we investigate into whether there is any dereliction of duty, etc., etc.? So our common sense tells us that those are not to be investigated into. We actually want to investigate into Mr. Timothy Tong, so we should not be confined or limited by the petition. We should be very careful about that. I'd also like to spend some time on explaining why we should be careful with expression-related matters. As members said, as we ask questions, we may be digging out more and more issues. In a mahjong game, this is just like a mahjong that can match any other mahjongs. So the expression-related matters may cover everything, is all-embracing, so we have to be very careful about that. Mr. Tony Jie, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, I agree with Mr. Porde. I think members have opinion on each of those proposed versions. Perhaps we should give some time to those colleagues to consider modifying their versions. As for the petition, I'd like to say something. Should we stick to each and every word in the petition? I personally think that the petition should only serve as a reference for us. As for the expressions to be used, I'm inclined to using such terms as investigation, because we may have to follow up on issues like whether or not the information submitted was accurate and true. So the expression investigate is more appropriate. As for doubts about information furnished by the ICAC, I agree that that should also be included. As for related matters, I believe that should be included as well. Otherwise, in future, the Select Committee may have to discuss a lot of issues to decide whether or not they are related matters. Well, some may not be related matters. Still, if you ask them questions, they still answer your questions. But whether or not the inclusion of related matters will cause the other party not to answer questions, that's also a possibility. So it doesn't matter so much whether or not we have related matters. Mr. Leung Kwok-him, if you read the expressions in Mr. Dennis Kwok's version, the last part is make suggestions in relation to other related matters. In fact, the scope is narrow, very narrow. For the first part is about specific behavior of Timothy Tong. Entertainment, gifts, and related matters. So we don't need to suspect that we ourselves are being harsh. Well, in fact, even Mr. Abraham Sheikh was agitated because he failed to answer our questions. Don't forget that hundreds of thousands of members of the public were watching the proceeding. In particular, those members of the public who just watched the salient parts of the proceeding would all the more like us to investigate into the details. When he comes, if he refuses to answer our questions, there's nothing we can do. So, why are we so afraid? In the past, I had a quarrel with Mr. Zhang Gasun on whether or not certain issues are related matters. And even the chairman did not know what to do back then. So you must include this expression related matters. Otherwise, he can just say that the question is not a related matter, then he can refuse to answer the questions. That will be against the very objective or purpose of setting up the Select Committee. So we must have related matters. And then whether or not the ICAC was providing inaccurate and untrue information, of course we have the suspicion. Otherwise, we don't need to have a Select Committee. Well, I'm about to finish, Mr. Chairman. I am worried that the LegCo will lose out because we just can't even ask questions. So we have to be fair. don't always say that we have a pretext. Of course, I have a pretext because we suspect him, we doubt him. We doubt Timothy Tong. We're now providing him with a public platform such that he can prove to us that we are wrong. Well, under the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance, he cannot refuse to come. For the ICAC, it's up to them to provide us with information. I think we have to be responsible. If we're given the power and we do not exercise that power, then it's our own fault. I think we should have broader powers, otherwise it will be too late to resent. All right, points understood. Ms. Sito, may I refer to Rules of Procedure 26, as well as Mr. Dennis Kwok's and my submission. We at least have to convince 20 colleagues why we needed a select committee. The content of lobbying should not be included in the TOR, that we agree. The TOR of the select committee does not have to copy every word of our submission. But of course, in the lobbying documents, there are certain issues that we would like to discuss, including the list of gifts presented by the ICAC. Now, I think the fact that we all witnessed is that the list was not comprehensive and thorough. That's already a fact. Why is it that the ICAC could submit information that's not thorough and comprehensive to the LegCo? That's why we touch upon this mechanism of collecting and vetting information received. As for 20(6), it is to protect the minority such that they can fulfill their duties. I tried to understand this with the legal advisor. A select committee established under 20(6), apart from summonses of witnesses and documents and powers and privileges, the other contents of the TOR are the same as other select committees. And 20(6) does have the implication of protecting the minority. Therefore, the scope of the terms of reference for this select committee should not be narrowed down. Of course, you said that we should remain neutral. We should not have some preconceived ideas. With that, I agree. Otherwise, we don't need a select committee to look into this matter. It's not a question of whether or not we accept the petition. It's just that we have to go through a process in judging whether or not we should accept evidence produced. And there's a deliberation process. At the end of the day, we have to draw our conclusions in accordance with the information received. I believe Mr. Dennis Kwok will agree to change the expression whether or not untrue or inaccurate information or responses were given to mislead the LegCo into a mechanism for the collection and vetting of information. All questions asked by LegCo members may not be looked into, even if untrue and inaccurate information are furnished to us. If we say that this is exceeding our terms of reference. As for actual operations, we understand that the Select Committee would definitely touch upon related matters and make suggestions. So if we accept that we're bound to make suggestions, then why should there be any problem in including the expression suggestion in this version? And for related matters, it should also be included. We shouldn't be worried about unlimited scope of discussion. Well, Ms. Seto has explained her views. Now, whether it is an examination or an investigation into Mr. Timothy Tong, I understand that different members have different views, as well as different analyses and viewpoints. However, I have to specially emphasize to Mr. Leung Kwok-him that we cannot have preconceived premises or pretexts. We're providing a platform through the LegCo and the public airwaves to allow these issues and persons to be understood better by the public. But we cannot say at this juncture that that person or organization is problematic. So I hope that under the terms of reference, we can proceed with the investigation. So for an unlimited scope of discussion, I have to tell Ms. Seto that members do have worries.
The legal advisor and the Secretariat explained that we can't go beyond the petition, but we have to see how we can better express the contents of the petition. And another point is we should not just accept the petition because otherwise it means we already have our mindset. Legal advisor, your point? Thank you, Chairman. I've read the two versions of TOR and have the following comments. Members have the following worries. First of all, scope of investigation and the expression of relevant matters, should that be included in the TOR? And thirdly, whether neutral words should be used. May I invite members to make reference to papers provided by the Secretariat, where you will find the TOR and the name of the select committees in the past. So you may like to make reference with the points there. The two versions, the title of the two versions start with study in Chinese. So members may like to see whether you would like to choose the word inquire or study. In Mr. Kwok's version, make recommendations is also included. in the Select Committee to inquire into matters related to post-service work of Mr. Leung Chin Man. Inquire was used and suggestions, recommendations were also made. For related matters, as mentioned by Ms. Sit Ho, exercising certain powers doesn't mean that you have unlimited powers under the law. How can we ensure that by putting down related matters, we do not go beyond the scope of the petition? I think it's a matter for the chairman to consider. Neutral wording, I think, is the members of the public are more inclined now to accept neutral wordings. The Select Committee is an inquiring body. For controversial matters, the general public expects the inquiry to be a neutral Select Committee. The inquiry should be a neutral one, and the Select Committee should act like a court and be fair, rather than having assumptions already. So from the legal perspective, using neutral wordings should be considered. Ms. Sit Ho, handling is included in the Secretariat's version. Handling covers the process itself. Arrangement and related matters are expressions used in Mr. Kwok's version that also covers the process. As for chairman's version, arrangement and handling are not covered. Just covered the duty visits, the gifts related matters, and entertainment, whether these acts are in line with his public office as the Commission of ICAC. So, Chairman's version is focusing on facts finding, whereas for when we put down arrangements and related matters, we try to find out the cause too. The TRR proposed by Mr. Kwok is what I made reference with in my version. In Mr. Kwok's version, it talks about whether the acts are in line with his public office. Acts like his overseas visits and entertainment that covers the process. In fact, I made reference with the points in Mr. Kwok's version. But related matters is included in Mr. Kwok's version, and related matters this is exactly the point that worries us, because that may broaden the scope too much. whether it's an inquiry or a study, I think we should stay in line with the petition. I joined Select Committee where PNP is applicable and also PNP not applicable. At the end of the day, it's up to the chairman to decide whether questions are related. So even if we don't put down related matters, we will raise related matters questions in the inquiry. Mr. Leung Kwok-him may like to broaden the scope a lot and ask questions about the whole ICAC. I don't agree with that. Inquiry into Cam 9Y was not under PNP, and we were very cautious. The inquiry took 2 years, and even pro-establishment Cam members were very cautious. That explains that even without PNP, members were self-disciplined. Now, when we inquired into Mr. Cam 9Y, did we use the word inquire? And I'm also concerned whether what we discuss here is workable. That means at the end of the day, we can have an effective voting process and that we come up with some results. For the Lehman Brothers inquiry, it took us 4 years, and even with 4 years, we could not even come up with a report. Inquiry into Mr. Cam 9Y took 2 years, so we have to consider the time and resource constraints. It's easy for you to set up a select committee under 20.6, but we should set up a select committee that make good reference. For Mr. Cam 9Y's inquiry, the witness refused to come. And even Mr. Porsche said it could not continue because there was no witness. Because the witness did not come, refused to come at the very beginning. And you chose to carry on with the inquiry. So why do you blame other people? This is unacceptable. If you put down related matters, it makes things easier for us in the inquiry. So I don't think the example given is appropriate. Mr. Leung, continue. Stay calm. You have your chance to speak later. With PNP, the witness is compelled to come, but now it's not the case. He can choose not to come. Another clarification, I was in the Select Committee on Lehman Brothers. It was a very complicated matter, and because Mr. Henry Chang took the matter to court saying that we did not have the authority to inquire into him, that's why it took so long for the inquiry. Let's put it to the vote, Chairman, whether we should include related matters, and we will know the result of whether of the impact of whether we include this expression. Another point, whether we are misled by the ICAC. This is an important point. We have to ask this question. You mean we should put down untrue, incomprehensive information? Yes. Maybe they simply forgot the information. So we have to ask the question so that we know the answer. If they give a reasonable reply, then the matter is settled. If we don't put this down, then the witness can come and say, I'm not going to answer the question. You can look at the system yourself. And if you want to look at or inquire into the system, they will query whether we have the authority to do so. So we have to make it clear what we want to do so that they can respond appropriately. If we say that they do not submit true and full information, they can put up their own explanation. If we simply put down to look into their system, we can't really ask anything from them. Mr. Paul Share.
Well, we should look back into the direction of the Select Committee. To examine is to examine into the past, the present, and the future. It's not just the Select Committee doing the work. The CE has already appointed a committee to look into directional matters. So if the Select Committee so wishes, it can also cover what that committee will do. But we have to look at our own resources as well. The Secretariat has prepared a list of the terms of reference of Select Committees appointed in the past. The more detailed the TOR is, or the more we don't need the expression related matters. I cannot accept what Mr. Leung Kwok-him said. If right from the very beginning we say that the information submitted was untrue and inaccurate, then we don't need any inquiry at all, because we've already drawn a conclusion. We are inquiring, judging, and discussing. So we have to be fair and just as well as open before we can win the trust of the public and society. So we have to be careful. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Dennis Kwok, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I'd like to thank the legal advisor for his comments, to which I agree. Now, if we look at Appendix 2 of the paper, 5 select committees are mentioned, and 3 out of those 5 select committees have related matters included in the terms of reference. So this was the past practice. I'd like to know why we should be different this time. As for neutral expressions like fair and just, they are essential. We have to be careful about such expressions. If any colleague is of the view that related matters is lopsided, then I'd like to listen to their views. I think that both the Secretariat and the legal advisor have said that this select committee is different from past select committees. For this particular select committee, it is based on a petition. So we have to observe the concrete contents of the petition. Recently, we had the Leung Chin-man case. For a normal select committee, we can invoke the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. But this one is different. We have to make a decision. Some members insist on using the expression related matters. Others think otherwise. So we have different opinion. I just want to explain the difference between this select committee and past select committees. My understanding is that we're clear what's in the petition, so I try to absorb in my version the content of the petition. At the council meeting, the president has cited the rules of procedure, and as no less than 20 members have supported the establishment of a select committee, the president handed the matter over to the House Committee. All right, we have had quite some discussions. We know our basic considerations. I'm not sure whether we can make a decision today. It's up to members. Well, even if we are to make a decision now, the House Committee can still change our decision. Is my understanding correct? Mr. Chairman, you mean to include related matters in the TOR? Well, no. What I meant was even if we have decided on a TOR, the House Committee can still change the decision. Well, theoretically, what's endorsed by the House Committee, well, the House Committee decided to establish a select committee. We're now trying to make the content of the petition more specific. So our understanding is that we should not go beyond the content of the petition. Yes, we can add in related matters. My question is, even if this subcommittee has proposed something for the TOR, when it goes to the House Committee can still veto us. Am I correct? Legal advisor? Mr. Chairman, as said just now, the establishment of the Select Committee is in accordance with ROP 20(6). So if the decision is validly made under the rules of procedure, then, as Mrs. Ma said, the decision is that the content of the petition will be made concrete and specific, and that will form the TOR of the Select Committee. The task has already been referred to the Select Committee, so I don't think in the House Committee members can further discuss the terms of reference once a decision is made here. Perhaps I can supplement. This subcommittee was appointed by the House Committee. As for the House Committee, although there's no provision in the rules of procedure that the House Committee needs to endorse or approve the TOR decided upon. For past select committees, there were discussions in the House Committee, a consensus was formed. Then after voting, the terms of reference of the Select Committee would be made specific. So we're actually following the established practice. This subcommittee was appointed by the House Committee. When we submit our report, the report is to go to the House Committee. Of course, the House Committee can further comment on the recommendations of the subcommittee. So my understanding is correct. If any member wants to amend the decision of the subcommittee, he can do so. We have to submit our report to the House Committee. Well, I absolutely don't want to see that happen, but I'd like to clarify procedural matters. This is unprecedented. I'm raising this to clarify procedural matters. Mr. Chairman, the establishment of a select committee is that some members want to do something, and now the House Committee has appointed this subcommittee for preparation. Recommendations of the subcommittee will go back to the House Committee, and a resolution will be moved in the House Committee for the select committee. That was the past procedure. This time, some members have already referred the petition to the House Committee, and the House Committee has referred that to the Select Committee. This preparation subcommittee is to discuss the TOR of the Select Committee and report back to the House Committee. So there's no question of the House Committee having to reconsider the decision of this subcommittee. All right, I am not going to argue about that. I just want to clarify the point. I accept the explanation of the Secretariat. Members, do you accept that explanation? Then we don't need any discussion because we're under time constraints. Now, let's go back to the TOR. I think members were more inclined to use the word inquire. What about 研究? Examination? What about the name of the Select Committee? Should we change the Chinese version into 调查 as well? That is to inquire. So the title should also be changed.
提一提醒啊，即係嗰個未去到有關事先，就係嗰個。
Mr. Leung Kwok-him, I'll come back to you later. So we'll use the word to inquire instead of examination 研究. That means we'll use 調查 in the Chinese version. Then what about the expression of related matters? Mr. Dennis Kwok? Mr. Chairman, I have a suggestion. I'll see whether it's acceptable to members. For related matters, can we say matters related to the content of the petition? Then we've actually set a rem for related matters. That is, we should not exceed the content of the petition. So, under the TOR, we confine ourselves to matters related to the content of the petition. I wonder whether that's acceptable to Dr. Priscilla Leung. Dr. Priscilla Leung, Ms. Sitho raised a specific point. Yes, I'd like to be specific. Well, she was talking about the ICAC, not Timothy Tong. And related matters. We should discuss this proposed expression. Yes or no? Mr. Wong Kwok-him? Mr. Wong Kwok-him, well, I believe we should be more stringent. Mr. Paul Tse? Mr. Chairman, I have tried to modify your version. All right, 研究 will become 調查. That's the Chinese version. And then we should delete that part. 是否符合 blah blah blah. Instead of 符合 comply, we should use the word appropriate. And then whether or not the information submitted should not use the expression accurate or comprehensive. That is, instead of 全面及真確, can we use 妥善? Which means something like proper. To facilitate ourselves, can we give members 5 minutes to modify their versions? Then we can take a vote on these 2 major versions. Let's take a break of 5 minutes. So members, please study the 2 versions before we come back for a decision.